Hello and welcome to Newspeak. I'm joined, as usual, by Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, our Senior Fellow and Royal Historian, and Amy Gallagher, Stand Up to Woke. No Philip, I'm afraid, this week because the storms, and this is on Friday, have prevented him from coming. No trains. But we will more than make up for that, I'm sure. Not to be too trivial about this, I mean, it's been quite a week in some ways, and a particularly horrifying week for this country. But before we talk about those events, we do have some local events, NCF local events, don't we, Rafe?
Yes, quite a number of local events happening across the country, so please do come along to any of these if you live in the towns. On Sunday the 26th of January, that's tomorrow, we'll be in Birmingham. On the 28th of January in Bath, in Dorset and in Liverpool. On the 29th of January in Southampton. On February the 4th we'll be in Sheffield. On the 13th of February we'll be in Lincoln, where you'll have a speaker from the Reform Party, Sean Matthews. On the 16th we'll be in Norwich. There'll be a discussion event happening there. On the 17th of February in Reading. Then on the 19th, we've got a big event in Brighton with Harrison Pitt, our fellow, as a speaker. And on the 20th of February in Beaconsfield with David Starkey. That's one not to miss. And then rounding up our events, on the 22nd of February, there'll be a lunch, that's a Saturday at noon in London. So do come along to all of these events if you can. Email locals@newcultureforum.org.uk, locals@newcultureforum.org.uk, or look in the comments underneath this video for that information. And all events are free of charge.
Thanks very much, Rafe. Yeah, great stuff. Well, yesterday we had the verdict on the Southport trial of Axel Rudikabana. We're all familiar now with the details. I think some of us kind of knew a few before about this. We don't have to worry about speaking freely now, so far as I can see. First things first, apart from the sheer unspeakable horror of the physical details, it wasn't actually meant to happen this way, was it? The guy was meant to have a trial.
Yes, this has been a very convenient turn of events for the government because, of course, the trial date was rescheduled, coincidentally, for the same day as Trump's inauguration, thereby preventing a lot of media coverage and limiting the amount of media attention it received. And as a big surprise to everyone, he delivered a guilty plea, thereby denying us all the long trial, which would have seen in minute detail all of the information relating to this case coming out day by day with media summaries of everything that was happening. All of this, some people have speculated is perhaps far too much of a coincidence and that it serves the government's agenda. Some have suggested was pressure applied on him? Did have his parents been given a good deal out of this in order for him to have a guilty plea, or have his, obviously his sentence was going to be reduced, albeit by a tiny bit, by having a guilty plea? We don't have any evidence either way on that, but it is rather convenient. But what's clear in the days following this is the lack of a trial is one thing, but you would have expected at this point for the media to then pick up that gauntlet and do their own thorough investigation of all of this. Instead of that, what we've seen is the media basically colluding with the government, colluding with all of our public bodies in trying to once again cover this up and deflect. And so the front pages the day after the guilty plea was announced was all about the Amazon killer. Suddenly it became about online harm, it became about big tech companies, how you can buy machetes and knives online, when of course we all know knives don't kill people. It's this brutal villain who's killed people. Every teenager has access to their parents' carving knives and kitchen knives. The idea that he was going to be stopped from committing this atrocity is simply for the birds. It's yet another act of deflection. And what we can clearly see, and the questions that need to be answered in this public inquiry that's been announced are, what did Keir Starmer know and when did he know it? Well, actually, we can make a good guess on that. We know full well he knew that there was an Al-Qaeda terrorist manual in this person's house. He knew that there was ricin, poison, in this person's bedroom, and yet despite that, they deliberately went on television and defamed and slandered a vast swathe of the British population as being far right in order to suppress any chance of a protest. And as a result of that, people are in prison. You can now say that they're political prisoners as a result of this deliberate act by the government to slur anybody who dared to link this crime with asylum seekers as being misinformation. Well, we know, of course, that he's the son of asylum seekers.
Yes. Yes. There were a lot of things swirling about, weren't there, that we weren't meant to talk about. I suppose online, mostly, to do with Keir Starmer, in this case. A lot of those seems to have now been dropped. You know, people want to know, as you say, when he knew. But the further back, the story, the backstory, was what was going on social media. And that seems to have now disappeared, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also that he was referred to Prevent 3 times, the anti-terrorist outfit, and that he had a history of violence. And it's quite likely that Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer would have known that at the time, that information would have been made available to them when they were smearing everyone as, causing disinformation for saying that he was a terrorist, or an Islamist. And we're still seeing that the word terrorist is not being used in relation to him, or it's by some people, but not by the sways of the media. And some of the details that have come out have just been so shocking. I mean, we've found out that he stabbed one of the girls 122 times. Another girl was almost beheaded. He's openly expressed that he was pleased that these girls had been killed. He was obsessed with murder and genocide and looking at all sorts of materials about killing. He openly expressed to his father that he wanted to kill a whole school. His father tried to stop him, but he didn't report him to the authorities. And this is a man who was given asylum into this country. We welcomed him in, and he didn't stop his son from doing this. So, and these are details that you have to kind of search for in the media. Like I've picked them up on Twitter and I've read through things and I found them, but they are not making the headlines. What's made the headlines, as Rafe said, was that he's an Amazon killer. Because one of the many knives that he had was bought from Amazon. I mean, it's just such a small and pathetic detail that they would pick up on. And this is, it doesn't shock me because that's exactly what they did with David Amos, that he was killed, murdered by an Islamist, and they started talking about online safety for MPs, and that had nothing to do with his murder. He was murdered in cold blood. It had nothing to do with online safety. So, it's just been shocking the extent to which the media are trying to bury this. We're not hearing, Islamism being talked about. We're not hearing the fact that he was an asylum seeker, he's the son of an asylum seeker, and that they are more prone to violence, particularly if their parents come from places where there are violence. That this is a pattern that we are seeing in many instances of terrorism in this country, that the terrorist is an asylum seeker or the son of asylum seekers. And another thing that we're not seeing is that, it's the targeting of girls and particularly white girls that is happening. And it's just being framed as an issue for all men, which is, not the case. When you saw his mugshot, you could see that this was not an ordinary man.
No. We can talk about the media in a minute, but what's your view on the sharing of these details? Some about the actual injury and extent of the injury. What do you feel about that? Some people think that, it's so upsetting for the families.
I think it is upsetting for the families, but we do need. I'm all for transparency, and I think it's important that we know all of this. Perhaps there are ways in which this information can, if it's in reports and so forth, rather than just spreading the goriest bits and the most salacious aspects on social media. My main issue, I think, there are lots of things that the Southport story needs to start a discussion on. For me, one of the most important ones is stopping and ending this Contempt of Court 1981 ads section that says you can't discuss anything for fear of prejudicing the trial. You don't find this requirement elsewhere. So in Canada it doesn't exist, in America it doesn't exist. In this country, the pre-trial can't be reported until after the main trial ends. In America, the pre-trial is reported on the same day. We get all those facts come out, important facts, and if any attempt is made to suppress the pre-trial, that becomes a story in and of itself in America. Every day you get analysis of what happened in court that day, you get opinion pieces in the papers, you get legal experts debating everything, so the public have full context confidence that they are getting the full story.
Yeah.
There's transparency, and you don't get mistrials in America for juries being prejudiced. That's why you sequester juries, for heaven's sake, you know. So we've got to a point in this country when the interests of having fair justice have now become so it's been taken over by the need for the public to have faith in the justice system and have faith that things aren't being covered up. And you can only restore faith by having full transparency and exposure. So that's one thing that we need to really change. The other thing we need to change from this, of course, is judges need to have discretion to give whole life tariffs to teenagers of the ages of 16 and 17, because this guy was only 9 days shy of his 18th birthday, which may be one of the reasons why he did it when he did. Being 9 days shy, being only 17, means that the judge couldn't put him to jail until he dies. Now, surely, you know, if Labour wants to give the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds as adults, then they should be eligible for full life tariffs at the discretion of a judge in these sorts of situations. Those are two big things, I think, which need to come out of this.
I think, yes. I mean, to go back to the original point as well about the details, I actually think the details actually should be published, simply because it does change the way people look at the thing. And sometimes that needs to happen. I mean, like the beheading aspect, we've all become very familiar with now. When you hear that this happened to a child of 7, then the effect is, death is not always just death. You know, there are particular kinds of death, and this was one of those. And I think it's very important. But your point there, actually, Rafe, about the getting rid of the sub judice laws, yes, but they don't abide by themselves here anyway. I mean, in the case of, for example, what was the name of the guy who drove a car into a mosque in Finsbury Park? You know, the Finsbury Park mosque. He drove a car in and some people were killed, or one person was killed. Immediately, within 24 hours, it was a terror attack. This is the guy's name. And similarly, when Joe Cox was murdered.
Yes, yeah.
Right wing, this is the guy, far right.
Well, these are two different things. So yes, Jonathan Hall Casey, who's the head of the terrorism review into terrorism legislation, has said there was no reason at all why Keir Starmer and the government couldn't have said that this chap was charged under the Terrorism Act for having this Al-Qaeda manual, and on the Biological War Act for having this ricin. There was no reason at all why they couldn't have responded to this the same way they did to the Finsbury Park bombing, etc. But that's different to actually going into the detail of the trial. But the jury would not be prejudiced by being told that this was a terror-related incident or was possibly a terror-related incident. There's no defence that Keir Starmer has on that level whatsoever.
Did you watch the summing up by the judge? It was quite interesting actually, because he did go into the reasons why it wasn't overtly called a terrorist charge, simply because he's bound by the law. But he said that in his own mind, it amounted to exactly the same as a terrorist attack. And it's very interesting watching all of that work out, actually, because he gave the guy, actually, the most he could possibly give him, given what the law is.
Yeah.
You know, some people online, a lot of people online, Amy, been talking about capital punishment, why this should, he should have, been executed or whatever. We don't have it, of course. We should have it again. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it should be said, the judge also said that it's unlikely he will ever be released. I don't know quite what will happen after the 51 years, but I guess he will go for parole, and maybe if the judge will make sure that he doesn't get released. But it has been making me think about the death penalty. I've generally tended to be against it. Unless, I guess for me, it's always a question of the possibility that you could get it wrong. But it would seem in this case, all the evidence is there and he's pleaded guilty. In those circumstances, and when it is extreme, I'm open to the idea. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've always been opposed to the death penalty for a whole variety of reasons. Firstly, it ends up costing a lot more money than people think, because people are on death row for years, and And also, if better 10 men go free than one innocent man is killed, I still think. But when you get to a case like this, where it's so clearly obvious that this person is the criminal in the matter, I'm beginning to think maybe we should have another threshold above reasonable doubt for a jury. Maybe there should be another threshold for the death penalty. If it's a dead certainty by the jury, then they actually can request the death penalty. Maybe that's the way that it should be. This has sort of moved me a bit on the issue, because reasonable doubt, I think, is too low a bar. But I think if there's a higher level of certainty, then perhaps you could have that. But of course, this entire discussion may be irrelevant, because he may not last very long in prison as it is, because of the crimes he's committed. Remember Ian Huntley, who murdered those 2 girls? He met his untimely end in prison, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's either put into solitary confinement for a long time, or he's going to meet his ends by his inmates.
Yes, I actually take the capital punishment thing. I asked you, but I actually take the same approach as I do to the deflection argument. I think it's actually not the point.
It's not, but without it was definitely,
yeah, of course. In the sense that even if you had death penalty, what he represents as a kind of problem is big time there, where it's absolutely there. Just talking about the media a bit, you mentioned it, Rafe, earlier. We want to take a look at a clip. Sky particularly didn't cover themselves in glory. I remember seeing one clip where the reporter was talking to a local Muslim representative. This guy was saying diversity is our strength outside the courtroom, and basically also that this was a matter of violence against women across all communities and everything. In other words, just waffle. And she didn't come back, she didn't challenge him. But then someone has found this clip, which they put up on social media. Let's just show it very briefly, Ollie, if we can. Thank you.
No doubt in my mind, had people done their job better in the last few years in relation to this man, those girls would still be alive.
Now, it seems obvious to me she doesn't like what he's saying, that guy.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you wonder, is that just her doing that, or is that orders from above? You do wonder how big the cover-up goes. Is it just at an individual level, people know that there's certain things they shouldn't talk about, or there's certain framings that they should place the narrative within? Or is it that they are being told that you have to present it this way, and if anything if these words are mentioned, you need to cut the thing off? But it does kind of encapsulate what has happened over the last week, in that the whole story of this is that it's been a cover-up, and it still feels like things are a bit covered up. And that's what's such an insult to the victims and the families and everyone, really.
Where do you think it leaves us? I mean, how many times do we sort of say on this programme, what will it take for people to change in their attitude? And this is a very difficult one, because you've already outlined it, but in the sense that we're talking, can we assume the guy was an Islamist, for example? They've made every possible chance, to actually lay that down on the line, and it hasn't been. They're sort of, it's, he had everything from Al-Qaeda manuals right through to sort of general genocidal stuff.
This is an important point, actually. It's something that I wanted to discuss, because, well, firstly, the biggest cover-up about this whole thing has been the media's reluctance to tackle this issue, and politicians, that this is an asylum seeker issue. So the whole problem here, of course, started with the protesters being dismissed as peddling misinformation by linking this to the asylum system, because this guy was born in Wales. Being born in Wales is irrelevant. The Manchester Arena bombing was an asylum seeker's child. The Nottingham murders was a young migrant who came to this country. So David Amis was a young migrant coming to this country. The Southport asylum seekers' children. As Amy touched upon, all of the psychological, sociological evidence shows that that asylum seekers who come from violent backgrounds or violent countries, and their children, even if their children are born in this country, are more prone to violence, more prone to criminality, irrespective of whether they are African Christians or they are Muslims from the Middle East or elsewhere. And that's something that the media and the politicians aren't willing to discuss. But that's the reason why this crime happened. It is the asylum system that is to blame for this person being in this country. And we've imported hundreds of thousands of people like him, young, fit men as well, who've crossed the channel on dinghies, who have participated in and have witnessed unspeakable horrors in their homelands, who've now come here, who are psychologically disturbed, who are emotionally dead and stunted, and who are completely unable to integrate into our society. And that, of course, puts a burden on our mental health services, on our benefit system, but it's putting the safety of the British people at risk and the security of the nation at risk. And, of course, you've got the 1,000 British-born people who went to fight for ISIS in Syria and have come back battle-hardened, emotionally dead and psychologically disturbed. They're here too. This is, I think, the biggest story because, Islamic terrorism is the biggest threat we face. But this is just as big, I would say, because it's not related to Islamism necessarily. It's about people coming from terrible backgrounds who are mentally not fit to be in this country. And that's where you're getting what people call our lone wolves. They're often these people who've been coming from tortured backgrounds. And so that's why it's not clear whether Axel Rudakabana was motivated by Islam, because, yes, he possessed this book from Al-Qaeda. He also had a book on the Mau Mau genocide, on the Somali ethnic clan-based genocides, on the Rwandan genocide. And the Rwandan genocide was mainly a Christian thing. It wasn't a Muslim thing there, although obviously there were Hutu Muslims as well. So I think we're getting we never discuss the second issue apart from Islamic terrorism, and that's the asylum seekers who are some of them are depraved and evil because of what they see. And I think this chap was a psychopath and made that way by his father's background.
Actually, one interesting thing is connected to that, and a few people have made the point, at least online. I think it's an interesting point. Is that also he could? I think somebody said, could he be Britain's first explicitly anti-white terrorist?
Well, woke terrorist. Yeah, that was another point I wanted to say.
Did you heard about that?
Yeah, that he apparently during his violence in school, at one occasion he spoke about white genocide or something against white people, and that a lot of the material he was looking at had a sort of colonial element to it. So it was kind of ethnic minorities versus white people or Anglo people. So that may have been in the mix in his motivations. So yeah,
I think actually that's one aspect of it. I think the woke left wouldn't have seen coming, actually, that someone actually could be, if they were crazy enough, could take this in and
But is there any surprise when you get day in, day out messaging from the media, from your school system about the evilness of the West, of Britain, oppression? He was looking up stuff about slavery. He was looking at stuff about the Amerindians being massacred. He was looking up stuff about the British in Kenya with the Mau Mau. This is why I think this goes beyond Islam, and this actually could be the first woke terrorist that we've got. We see evidence of.
And it's important as well with the asylum seeker thing to remember that the thing that was seen as the worst thing within the rioting was that there was a targeting of an asylum seeker hotel, which is obviously wrong and illegal. And there were people saying online, burn the place down because there was asylum seekers in it. And obviously that's wrong to say that. But, they were smeared as racists. They're just racist for attacking an asylum seeker hotel, when we realised that actually it was a key part, and maybe they knew that he was an asylum seeker or his dad was an asylum seeker. And that was the reason why they were angry. Obviously, they were wrong to do what they did, but their anger would have been understandable. You can see why they targeted asylum seekers or an asylum seeker hotel. So it was, understandable.
I think, all these issues are huge. I can't help it when you put this Rudakabana thing along with the rape gangs. I think that there is this is a real turning point actually for our country, and I don't mean people are finally realizing. I don't mean anything like that. Actually, it's in a bad way. I think that the contract with the state is entirely gone. They can't keep us safe, and they almost don't care about keeping us safe, actually. I can't help feeling that, in fact, all of our history over this century has got to be reassessed. And that, doesn't this basically call into question democracy even?
Yeah, I think the reason for these cover-ups, the deflection about this asylum seeker's child, about the rape gangs, is because the implications of all of this are so explosive for the government. How can you tell the British public that we have potentially millions of people in this country who are ticking time bombs? I mean, that's what we've imported a population of ticking time bombs, let alone we are the ones responsible for admitting them to this country, and they are actually a direct risk to life and liberty. And that's, I think, why we're getting people putting their heads in the sand, but that just makes the situation worse. We need to have a reckoning about all of this.
Actually, speaking of people putting their heads in the sand, I know I ask this question every time, but how much of this do you think average person, has taken on? How much do you think they understand the sort of issues that we're talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was speaking to someone who works with people in the private sector, so you'd imagine they'd be quite conservative, and he was saying that they're what they were talking about, what they took away from it was, big tech, Elon Musk, and all this. Did you see Elon Musk doing a Nazi salute at the at the Trump inauguration, and they were saying, it's terrible that people, what children are viewing online. So they're talking about social media, and that does seem to be, people do fall for it still, what they read in the headlines, because it's so strong. When you see, all the newspapers going with this story, you seem mad to go against it. Well, that's the big takeaway. That's what we should take from this, and people don't question. So I don't know what it will take. I mean, this this Southport terrorist attack, when you saw it in the news, it was among many other kind of stabbings in London and attacks. It wasn't just what you can't even now say, it's absolutely awful, but it's rare, because actually you're seeing stabbings regularly every day. And I don't know what it would take. I know that people say that London feels unsafe, but they kind of stop there. They say, it's a crime issue and, politicians need to do more, but they don't look further into the reasons why.
I know, but because people have been trained not to now, haven't they? And they're frightened of doing that.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I saw a video online just yesterday of a group of young lads on a weekend bender in Poland, and they were being interviewed by someone, and they said how wonderfully free they felt, and it was so safe compared to London, and they were really enjoying it. And then the person said, well, why isn't it, why is it more safe? And they said, well, because there's less crime. And they said, well, who's committing the crime? And these 4 white English young lads, you knew what they were thinking, and one of them just said, people who don't have the same opportunities in life. And you just see there, of course, they know what's happening, but they've been programmed to basically reject what their eyes see.
And also, actually, they probably don't want to say anything that's going to be forever online.
Yeah.
And you can sort of blame them. When you look about at the ruins of our country at the moment, actually, and then we look across the Atlantic and extraordinary, exuberant scenes, and I think. Connor was there from NCF, and a lot of people were all there. Some of them ended up in their hotel rooms, from what I can see, but they were all sort of roughly there. What did you feel? I mean, did you feel a burst of these 100 executive what are they, directives?
Yeah, executive orders. Yeah, it was extraordinary. It was such a difference to what's happening in here. I mean, I felt extremely jealous. It's like a whole other world, But it is very exciting. Yeah, Trump he gave his inauguration speech. He's coming across, I think he's been coming across very calm, very serious, very different kind of Trump. And some of the executives orders that he brought in were brilliant. He's left all the climate agreements. He's left the World Health Organization. He sacked all the DEI staff immediately.
Whoa, this is a big one.
Yeah, yeah. He kind of done away with woke. He said that there's only going to be 2 genders in all of our organisations going forward. We're not going to have gender identity as a concept. Just loads of things, and of course declaring a national emergency at the border, and that he's going to prevent illegal migrants from entering the country, and he's going to start deporting ones that were already here. It was just like a dream. You just think, oh God, imagine if that happened here. I mean, if we got even just sort of 5% of that speech here, we'd be thinking, oh, it's amazing,
I love the way he sort of sat there at this desk and then held up these orders for everyone to see.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, it's like really open. I mean, do you share that feeling? Or?
Oh, yes, I know. It was wonderful. But envy, looking over it with envy at the potential where there's a will, there's a way, And if only we had that determination here, great things can still happen in this country. The hope that we have to have is that in the next 2 years, Trump will revitalize America to such a degree that his actions will be like a sort of a tsunami that will wash over Britain and Europe and have some effect at actually changing the discussions here. So that's the best we can really hope for, is people see what he's doing, see that it works, see that the public are really receptive to it, and that makes politicians, who after all are always looking to be re-elected, to actually come round at least on this. But yeah, it was terrific to see, particularly, of course, things like DEI, just like stopping everything else, but also understanding full well the power of the deep state. Because what's happening in Washington now is they are redefining these DEI programs to try to hide them from the president. And so the White House has said, you have 10 days to whistleblow where you see these programs being renamed, and you have no repercussions. If after 10 days we find out about this, we're going to come down on that, like tongue and bricks on you. I mean, so they're really backing this up. And of course, sending the army to the southern border, it's great. Some people are a bit concerned, alarmed about his, quest for the Panama Canal and so forth. And people in Canada, I know, which is a relatively harmless place, are a bit aghast, even on the right, about some of his speeches about making it the 51st state. But people have to understand that within the geopolitical context, he's trying to warn off China from making any inroads into the Americas, which is essentially America's playground, America's neighborhood. That's what's behind a lot of this. And so you need to always interpret what Trump is saying, that through the rhetoric, see the geopolitical reasoning behind it.
Yes, interesting. Really, was you mentioned that we're feeling envious. Could it happen here? I mean, I noticed that Rupert Lowe was saying absolutely, it can happen here. But then you look, and I know you might think these aren't related, but you look at 70% of people still think Trump's a bad thing here, and in Europe, but worse here. Same amount of people think Elon Musk is a bad thing. And you look at it and think, we're lost. If that's their attitude to these people, it's kind of indicative, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, perhaps people's opinions might change over the next 4 years, and perhaps they're not. But I do feel like the Overton window is shifting. So you see with Rupert Lowe that he is openly calling for mass deportations. I don't think we've ever I've never heard an MP say that. It's just
illegals.
Yeah, I mean, that's a kind of relatively new thing. I think nobody would have said that because they would have been too scared, and it's too it's too outrageous. But actually now people are saying, oh no, that we need to take action. So it might be that what we see happening in America might mean that certain things, MPs see it as more permissible to suggest things here. But I think it will take time. I think we're way behind America. I think it won't be if there is going to be a significant change here, I think it would still be another 5 or 10 years. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, sadly, which means we are going to keep suffering.
I think, and if you look at recent history in American politics, the Republican presidents, Republican candidates who've had the support of the American people have always been rejected by Europeans. In George W. Bush, the same thing. People in Europe couldn't understand how George W. got elected. But that just means we need to have a British version. So everything needs to be polished and refined, because American politics and the American way of doing things is very raw, very brazen. That doesn't suit the British psyche. But there are definitely ways you can adapt Trumpian policies in a more palatable version for the Brits.
Yes, and also Reagan. People tend to forget, although I think Trump has been particularly, reviled, but Reagan was marked to within an inch of his life. Do you remember Spitting Image and the president's brain is missing? And, and then sort of gradually, in retrospect, even now, I think we probably think he's okay compared to Trump. That's what the kind of European... But I get really fed up, with that European attitude.
Yeah, I do.
What right have you got? You're talking as though you're still in a position of preeminence. They don't give a damn what happens in Europe. I mean, I know this probably might rile you a little bit, but this special relationship thing, it's rubbish. It hadn't existed for ages. They don't even think about us. I'm sorry. I mean, I would hate it. I'd love it to be different, But when you start hearing politicians saying all these particular special relationships, it's not there. We don't exist in the headlines unless, of course, something like, rape gangs comes up or a royal wedding.
It's true. There's no special relationship. America always puts its own interests first, as every country does. Britain puts its own interests first. So it's only natural that if British interests are opposite to America's interests will go first. And yes, the special relationship is something that you only hear a president say when he's in the presence of a British Prime Minister. But there is a cultural affinity. There's a great respect. You know, Trump has put Churchill's bust back in the Oval Office for a reason. There's an Anglophilia, especially on the northeastern coast and in New England and all around there, in the Harvard, all these places there. There's at the same time anti-British because of the revolution, but also very pro-British. And that you do find that in the corridors of power, because they do still see it in many ways as the mother country and the birthplace of democracy. That's why Elon Musk is so upset on Twitter all the time about Britain, because they do view it, as sort of Greece to Greece to America's Rome.
Actually, Jordan Peterson was very good on that. He said, do you realise how sad it makes us, in Canada and North America generally. Yeah. I think, well, look, a very, very good thing's happened and a shockingly bad thing this week. But we're going to carry on talking a little bit for our members. But in the meantime, Rafe, Amy, thanks very much indeed, and see you next time.
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.